I was 57 years old when I realized I had dedicated my entire life to a lie. And the worst part? I was not just a believer. I was a bishop. For nearly a decade, I had been the one teaching it, enforcing it, and watching it shape the lives of hundreds of people who trusted me. I had sat across from teenagers and asked them intimate questions about their worthiness. I had counseled couples on the verge of divorce to stay together for the covenant. I had told grieving parents that their doubts were the work of Satan, and I believed every single word that came out of my mouth. But let me tell you how a single piece of paper destroyed everything I thought I knew. My name is Marcus Jensen. I was born in Provo, Utah in 1966, the fourth generation of a family that had been in the church since the handcart pioneers. My great-great-grandfather walked across the plains and nearly died in the Martin Handcart Company. That story was the foundation of my identity. I grew up believing that my bloodline was sacred, that God had prepared my family for generations to bring me into the covenant. I never questioned it. Why would I? Everyone around me believed the same thing. I served my mission in Argentina. I married Linda in the Salt Lake Temple when I was 23. We had 4 children, all of whom served missions or married in the temple. I worked as an accountant, served in every calling the church gave me, and in 2015, I was called as bishop of my ward in Provo. It was the highest honor I could imagine. When the stake president extended the calling, I wept. I felt the Spirit so strongly that I could barely breathe. I remember thinking, this is what I was born to do. For 8 years, I poured everything into that calling. I woke up at 5 in the morning to study the scriptures. I spent 20 hours a week on church responsibilities on top of my full-time job. I conducted hundreds of interviews, listening to confessions that ranged from minor sins to devastating secrets. I held the hands of dying members. I blessed babies and set apart missionaries. I excommunicated 2 people for adultery and 1 for apostasy. I believed I was doing God's work. I believed I was saving souls. And then Emily left a folder on my desk. Emily was my youngest. 22 years old, a history major at BYU. The only one of my children who ever seemed to have questions. Not rebellious questions, just curious ones. She would ask things at Sunday dinner like, why do we only talk about Joseph Smith's first wife? Or, why did the church change the temple ceremony? I always gave her the same answers every parent gives. Those are anti-Mormon lies. Focus on your testimony. Some things require faith, not answers. I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was being a good father. The folder was sitting on my desk on a Tuesday morning in March. I almost threw it away. It looked like a stack of printed articles, and I assumed Emily had left some school assignment behind. But I saw the words, Gospel Topics Essays on the first page, and I recognized them. I had heard about these essays. The church had published them on its official website a few years earlier. I had never read them. Why would I? I already knew the truth. But I also knew that Emily had been struggling. Her questions had become more frequent, her eyes more distant. I decided to read the essays so I could help her. I wanted to understand what was troubling her so I could lead her back to the light. I sat down with my morning coffee. Sorry, not coffee. Old habit. I sat down with my herbal tea, the kind that is technically allowed, and I started reading. The first essay was about the translation of the Book of Mormon. I expected it to confirm what I had always taught. Joseph Smith translated the golden plates using the Urim and Thummim, the sacred interpreters given to him by the angel Moroni. That was the story I had learned in primary. That was the story in every church painting, every lesson manual, every missionary discussion I had ever given. But the essay said something different. It said that Joseph Smith often translated by placing a seer stone in a hat and burying his face in the hat to block out the light. A stone he had found while digging a well, a stone he had previously used for treasure hunting. I read that paragraph 3 times. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, like the floor had shifted slightly beneath me. This could not be right. This was on the church's official website, but it contradicted everything I had ever taught. I had shown people paintings of Joseph Smith studying the plates with his finger tracing the characters. I had testified of the sacred translation process. I had never mentioned a hat. I had never mentioned a treasure hunting stone. I told myself it was a minor detail. Translation methods were not essential to salvation. I kept reading. The next essay was about the multiple accounts of the first vision. I knew about this. I had heard critics claim that Joseph Smith's story changed over time, and I'd always dismissed it as anti-Mormon propaganda. But here was the church admitting that Joseph Smith told the story differently at different times. In some accounts, he saw one personage. In others, he saw two. In some, he was seeking forgiveness for sins. In others, he was seeking to know which church was true. The details varied significantly. The essay tried to explain these differences, but the explanations felt hollow. I had spent 40 years testifying that the first vision was the foundation of the restoration. I had told people that Joseph Smith's account was clear, consistent, and unwavering. I had borne witness of it with tears in my eyes. And now I was learning that the story I told was not the whole story. I felt sick. Not the kind of sick you feel when you have a cold. The kind of sick you feel when someone you love has betrayed you. But I kept reading. I had to know. I had to understand what my daughter had seen. The next essay was about plural marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo. I knew about polygamy, of course. Every Mormon knows that the early prophets practiced plural marriage. But I had always believed it was a reluctant commandment, that Joseph Smith resisted it, that he only took additional wives because God commanded him to, and that those marriages were primarily about caring for widows and raising up righteous seed. The essay told a different story. Joseph Smith married at least 33 women. Some of them were teenagers. One was 14 years old. Several of them were already married to other men, living husbands. Men who were still alive and still married to these women when Joseph Smith took them as plural wives. I stopped reading. I walked to the bathroom and vomited. I wish I could tell you that was the moment I lost my testimony. I wish I could say that the truth hit me all at once, clean and sudden like a bone breaking. But it was not like that. It was slow. It was the most painful experience of my life. Because even after reading those essays, I did not want to believe. I loved the church. I love my calling. I love my family, and my family was built on the foundation of the gospel. If the church was not true, then what was my marriage? What were my children's missions? What was my life? I spent the next 3 weeks reading, not anti-Mormon literature, just the church's own materials, the gospel topics essays, the Joseph Smith papers, official church histories that had been published decades ago, but that I had never been encouraged to read. I learned about the Book of Abraham. I had taught from that book my entire life. I had quoted it in talks and lessons. The book claimed to be a translation of ancient Egyptian papyri written by Abraham himself. But in 1966, the original papyri were rediscovered in a museum. Egyptologists examined them. They were common funeral documents. They had nothing to do with Abraham. They dated to 2,000 years after Abraham would have lived. The characters Joseph Smith claimed to translate did not match any of the meanings he gave them. I learned about the Kinderhook plates. A group of men in 1843 forged some brass plates and showed them to Joseph Smith to test him. Joseph Smith began translating them. He claimed they contained the history of a descendant of Ham. The plates were a hoax. He translated a hoax. I learned about the changes to the temple ceremony. I had been through the temple hundreds of times. I had made sacred covenants. But the ceremony I participated in was dramatically different from the original. Blood oaths had been removed. Penalties had been removed. Women's covenants had been changed. The church altered its most sacred ordinances without ever acknowledging that changes had been made. Every night I sat in my office with the door closed, reading until 2 or 3 in the morning. Every night I discovered something new that contradicted what I had been taught. Every night I felt another piece of my testimony crumble, and the worst part was the loneliness. I could not talk to anyone. I could not tell Linda. I could not tell my children. I could not tell anyone in my ward. I was the bishop. I was supposed to have all the answers. I was supposed to be the one who helped others with their doubts. Who was supposed to help me? I remember one night, about a month after I found those essays, I was sitting in my office at 3 a.m. The house was silent. Linda was asleep. And I was reading about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, about how Mormon settlers in 1857 dressed as Native Americans and slaughtered over 100 innocent men, women, and children from a wagon train passing through Utah. I read about how Brigham Young likely knew. I read about how the church covered it up for over a century. And I just started crying. Not quiet tears. Deep, shaking sobs that I had to muffle with my hand so I would not wake Linda. I cried for the people who died in that meadow. I cried for the lies I had been told. I cried for the lies I had told others. I cried for my children who had built their lives on the same foundation that was now cracking beneath my feet. But I had no idea what was coming next. Because reading alone in my office was one thing. What happened when I tried to share what I learned with Linda was something else entirely. If stories like this resonate with you, you are not alone. Join this community by subscribing. There are many more untold stories waiting to be shared. I decided to tell Linda on a Saturday afternoon. The kids were not coming for dinner that week, and I thought we would have time to talk. I had rehearsed what I would say. I was not going to attack the church. I was not going to tell her I had lost my testimony. I was just going to show her the essays, the official essays, from the church's own website. I thought if she could see what I had seen, she would understand. I found her in the kitchen preparing food for a ward activity the next day. She was humming a hymn. I think it was, "I Am a Child of God." She looked so peaceful, so certain, and I almost did not say anything. I almost turned around and walked away and kept the weight of what I knew locked inside me forever. But I could not do that. 35 years of marriage, 35 years of honesty. I could not lie to her. Not about this. "Linda," I said, "I need to talk to you about something." She looked up from the counter. "What is it?" I sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were shaking. "I've been reading some things. About the church. Things I didn't know." Her expression changed immediately. The softness left her eyes. "What things?" "The Gospel Topics essays, on the church's website. There are things in there that I was never taught, that contradict what I've been teaching for 40 years. She put down the spoon she was holding. "Marcus, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I have questions, serious questions, about Joseph Smith, about the Book of Mormon, about things I always believed were true." She stared at me. For a moment, I saw something in her eyes that might have been fear, but then it was gone, replaced by something harder. "Have you been reading anti-Mormon material?" "No." "Linda, these are from the church's own website, official essays, published by the church." "I don't care where they're from. I don't need to read them. I know the church is true. But if you just look at them, no." Her voice was sharp, final. "I'm not going to let Satan into my home. I'm not going to let him destroy our family. This isn't Satan. These are facts. Historical facts that the church has admitted are true." She picked up the spoon again. Her hands were trembling. "Marcus, you're scaring me. I think you need to talk to the stake president. I think you need to get a blessing." "I don't need a blessing. I need you to listen to me." She turned away from me. Her shoulders were rigid. "I've heard enough. I won't discuss this again." I sat at that table for a long time after she walked out of the kitchen. I sat there and watched the afternoon light move across the floor. And I realized that the woman I had loved for 35 years, the woman I had built my entire life with, the woman I had knelt across the altar from in the Salt Lake Temple, that woman had just chosen the church over me, and I had no idea how deep that choice would cut. That Sunday I stood at the pulpit and looked out at my congregation, 200 faces looking up at me, families I had counseled, young people I had interviewed, elderly members I had visited in the hospital. They trusted me. They believed in me. And I was supposed to bear my testimony. I opened my mouth. The words were right there, the same words I had said hundreds of times. I know the church is true. I know Joseph Smith was a prophet. I know the Book of Mormon is the Word of God. But the words would not come. They stuck in my throat like stones. I stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. People started to shift in their seats. Linda was watching me from the front row, her face pale. I finally said something. I do not even remember what. Something about gratitude. Something about family. Something that was not a lie, but was not the truth either. I finished and sat down, and I could feel the confusion in the room. I could feel people wondering what was wrong with their bishop. After the meeting, Brother Thompson approached me in the hallway. He was in his 70s, a high priest who had known me since I was a boy. "Bishop," he said quietly, "are you all right? That was unusual." I forced a smile. "Just tired, long week." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. And I knew that whatever I said, whatever excuses I made, people would start to notice. People would start to talk. I walked into that building not knowing it would be one of the last times I would stand at that pulpit as bishop. I walked into that building still hoping I could find a way to make it work, to reconcile what I had learned with the life I had built. But what I discovered in the weeks that followed would make reconciliation impossible, and the price of truth would be higher than I ever imagined. The weeks after that Sunday were the loneliest of my life. Linda and I slept in the same bed but lived in different worlds. She would not discuss what I had shared with her. Every time I tried to bring it up, she would leave the room or change the subject or simply say, "I won't let Satan destroy our family." After a while, I stopped trying. The silence between us grew into something physical, a wall that neither of us knew how to climb. I continued to serve as bishop, but everything felt different. Every testimony I heard felt hollow. Every lesson I taught felt like a performance. I would sit in my office during interviews and listen to 16-year-old boys confess to looking at pornography. And I would ask them the same questions I had always asked, the questions about worthiness and repentance and the law of chastity. And I would feel sick to my stomach. Who was I to judge anyone? Who was I to sit in that chair and decide whether someone was worthy to take the sacrament, to enter the temple, to be called of God? I remember one interview in particular. A young woman named Sarah, 17 years old, preparing to go to BYU in the fall. She sat across from me with her hands folded in her lap, and I could see that she was nervous. She was a good kid. I had known her since she was in primary. "Bishop," she said, "I need to confess something." I nodded. "Go ahead." "I've been having doubts about the church, about whether it's true." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've been reading things online, things that scare me." My heart stopped. I looked at this girl, this bright young woman with her whole life ahead of her, and I saw myself. I saw the same fear in her eyes that I felt every night when I sat alone in my office, and I knew what I was supposed to say. I was supposed to tell her that doubt was a tool of Satan. I was supposed to tell her to stop reading and start praying. I was supposed to tell her to trust her testimony and ignore the voices of the world. But I could not do it. I could not lie to her. "Sarah," I said slowly, "what kinds of things have you been reading?" She looked surprised. Most bishops did not ask for details. Most bishops shut down the conversation before it could begin. "The CES letter," she said, "and some of the gospel topics essays, and I don't understand why we were never taught these things. Why did no one tell us about the different accounts of the first vision? Why did no one tell us about Joseph Smith's other wives?" I sat there in silence for a long moment. I could feel the weight of my calling pressing down on me. I could feel 40 years of conditioning telling me to protect the church, to protect this girl from the dangerous path she was walking. But I also felt something else, something that felt more true than anything I had felt in months. "Sarah," I said, "I don't have good answers for you. I wish I did. But I think it's okay to have questions. I think it's okay to not know everything." She stared at me. "Really? Really? Just be careful. Take your time. Don't make any decisions you're not ready to make." She left my office looking confused but also relieved. And I sat there for a long time after she was gone, wondering if I had just helped her or hurt her. Wondering if I had just committed the first act of my own apostasy. That night I told Linda what had happened. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping she would understand. Maybe I was hoping she would see that my doubts were not a disease but a desperate search for truth. She was sitting on the bed reading her scriptures. When I finished telling her about Sarah, she closed the book and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was something worse. It was pity mixed with fear. "Marcus," she said, "I think you need to ask to be released." "What?" "As bishop, I think you need to ask to be released. Before you hurt someone. Before you destroy someone's testimony the way you're destroying your own." "I'm not destroying anything, I'm just being honest." "Honest?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You call this honest? You're supposed to be a shepherd, Marcus. You're supposed to lead people to Christ. And instead you're leading them away." "I didn't lead Sarah anywhere. I just told her it was okay to have questions." "That's leading her away. Don't you see that? Doubt is not faith. Questions are not testimony. When you tell people it's okay to doubt, you're telling them it's okay to leave. You're giving them permission to abandon everything." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her that blind faith was not faith at all, that a testimony that could not survive questions was not worth having. But I could see in her eyes that she was not listening. She had already made her decision about me. She had already decided that I was lost. "I'll talk to the stake president," I said quietly. "I'll ask to be released." She nodded, and something in her shoulders relaxed, as if a burden had been lifted, as if the problem was being solved. But the problem was not being solved. The problem was just beginning. I called President Harrison the next morning and asked if we could meet. He agreed, and that afternoon I drove to the stake center with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. President Harrison was a good man. I had known him for 20 years. He had been at my children's baptisms, at my father's funeral, at countless ward activities and stake conferences. I trusted him. I believed he would listen. I was wrong. We sat in his office, the same office where I had received my calling as bishop 8 years earlier. The same paintings on the walls, the same photo of the Salt Lake Temple, the same feeling of being in a sacred space where God's will was revealed. "Marcus," President Harrison said, "what's troubling you?" I took a deep breath. "President, I've been reading the Gospel Topics essays, the ones on the church's website, and I've discovered some things that I didn't know. Things that concern me." He nodded slowly. "What kinds of things?" I told him. I told him about the seer stone and the hat, about the multiple accounts of the first vision, about Joseph Smith's plural wives, including the 14-year-old and the women who were already married, about the Book of Abraham and the Egyptian papyri. I told him everything, and I watched his face as I spoke, hoping to see some recognition, some acknowledgement that these were legitimate concerns. But his expression never changed. He listened with the same patient smile he always wore, the smile of a man who has heard it all before and has all the answers. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Marcus, I appreciate you sharing this with me. It takes courage to admit when you're struggling." "I'm not struggling with my faith," I said. "I'm struggling with facts. These are facts that the church has admitted are true. Facts can be interpreted in many ways. The adversary is clever. He takes truths and twists them into weapons against the faithful. This isn't the adversary. This is church history. This is what actually happened. He held up his hand. Marcus, let me ask you something. When you received your calling as bishop, did you feel the Spirit? Yes. When you've borne your testimony over the years, have you felt the Spirit? Yes, but when you were sealed to Linda in the temple, did you feel the Spirit? Of course I did. Then you know the church is true. You've felt it. The Spirit has confirmed it to you countless times. Don't let historical details shake what you've experienced personally. I stared at him. President, I'm not asking about feelings. I'm asking about facts. Joseph Smith married a 14-year-old girl. He married other men's wives. The Book of Abraham doesn't match the papyri. These aren't interpretations. These are documented facts. His smile flickered for just a moment. The Lord works in mysterious ways. We don't always understand why the prophets did what they did, but we trust that God was guiding them. How can I trust that? How can I trust anything I've been taught when so much of it turned out to be incomplete or misleading? President Harrison leaned forward. His voice was gentle but firm. Marcus, I'm going to give you some counsel. Stop reading. Stop researching. Focus on the basics. Read the Book of Mormon. Pray. Serve others. The answers you're looking for won't be found in history books. They'll be found on your knees. I left his office feeling more alone than ever. He had not heard me. He had not even tried to hear me. He had given me the same answers I had given to others for 40 years, the same answers that now felt like a door slamming shut. But the worst part was that I knew he believed what he was saying. He was not lying to me. He was not trying to deceive me. He genuinely believed that the solution to my crisis was to stop asking questions and start praying harder. And I realized that this was how the church worked. This was how it had always worked. When someone had doubts, you did not address the doubts. You questioned the doubter. You made them feel that their lack of faith was the problem, not the facts they had discovered. I had done this myself. I had done it to Sarah. I had done it to countless members who came to me with questions. I had told them to pray more, to study more, to doubt their doubts. I had never once considered that maybe their doubts were valid. Maybe the questions were more important than the answers. Have you ever felt trapped between who you were supposed to be and who you really are? Share your experience in the comments below. The next few weeks were a blur of pain and pretense. I went through the motions of being bishop, but my heart was not in it. I conducted meetings I no longer believed in. I gave blessings I no longer trusted. I sat in testimony meetings and listened to people bear witness of things I now questioned, and I felt like a fraud. Linda and I barely spoke. She had moved to the spare bedroom, claiming she needed space to think, but I knew the truth. She could not stand to be near me. My doubt had become a contagion in her eyes, something that might infect her if she got too close. I had not told my children yet. I kept hoping that something would change, that I would find an answer that would make everything okay again. But every time I thought I had found solid ground, it crumbled beneath my feet. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening in early June. My oldest son, Ryan, called to say he was coming over. He did not say why, just that he needed to talk. Ryan was 32, married to a woman named Jessica, father of 3 beautiful children. He had served his mission in Brazil and worked as a seminary teacher in Salt Lake. Of all my children, he was the most devoted to the church. When I saw him pull into the driveway, I felt a knot form in my stomach. We sat in the living room. Linda was there too, sitting in the chair by the window, her arms crossed. I could tell from her expression that she had called him. She had told him something. She had brought in reinforcements. "Dad," Ryan said, "Mom told me you've been struggling. That you've been reading some things that have shaken your testimony." I looked at Linda. She would not meet my eyes. "I've had some questions," I said carefully, "about church history, about things I discovered in the Gospel Topics essays." "The essays?" Ryan frowned. "Dad, those essays were written to help people. They provide context for difficult topics. You're not supposed to read them in isolation. You're supposed to read them with the Spirit. I did read them with the Spirit. The Spirit told me something was wrong. No. Ryan's voice was sharp. The Spirit doesn't lead people away from the church. That's not how it works. If you felt something telling you the church isn't true, that wasn't the Spirit. That was something else. Ryan, I've felt the Spirit my whole life. I know what it feels like. And what I felt when I read those essays was not deception, it was clarity. For the first time in 57 years, I felt like I was seeing the truth. The truth? He laughed bitterly. Dad, you've been a bishop for almost a decade. You've dedicated your life to the gospel, and now you're going to throw it all away because of some essays? It's not just the essays, it's everything. The essays led me to the Joseph Smith papers, the church's own historical documents. I read about the Kinderhook plates. I read about the changes to the temple ceremony. I read about the Mountain Meadows massacre. Ryan, there's so much we were never taught. So much that was hidden from us. Hidden? He shook his head. Nothing was hidden. You just weren't looking. The church has always been transparent about its history. That's not true. I taught Sunday school for 15 years. I went through the temple hundreds of times. I never once heard about Joseph Smith putting a rock in a hat. I never once heard about his 14-year-old wife. I never once heard about the Book of Abraham problems. If that's transparency, I don't know what deception looks like. Ryan stood up. His face was red. Dad, have you been reading anti-Mormon material? No. Everything I've read has been from church sources, official sources. That's what they want you to think. The anti-Mormons take church sources and twist them. They present facts without context. They make things look worse than they are. Ryan, I read the original documents. I read Joseph Smith's own words. There's no twisting. There's no anti-Mormon spin. This is what happened. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the struggle in his eyes. He wanted to believe me. He wanted to trust his father. But he had been taught his whole life that doubt was a sin, that questioning the church was the first step toward spiritual death. And now his father was standing in front of him, questioning everything. Dad, he said quietly, I think you need help. I think you need to talk to someone, a professional. Maybe a counselor who specializes in faith transitions. Faith transitions? Ryan, I don't need a counselor. I need someone to talk to me honestly. I need someone to look at what I've found and tell me if I'm crazy or if this is real. It's not real. His voice was firm. The church is true. I know it. I've felt it. And whatever you're going through, it's not truth. It's a test. It's the adversary trying to destroy our family. Linda finally spoke. Ryan's right. Marcus, you need to choose. You can keep going down this path or you can come back. You can repent, you can rebuild your testimony. But you can't have both. You can't stay in this family and stay in your doubt. I looked at my wife. I looked at my son. I looked at the living room where I had raised my children, where we had held family home evenings, where we had knelt together in family prayer every night for 30 years. And I realized that I had already lost them, not because I had left them, but because I had stopped believing what they believed. In their eyes, that was the same thing. I can't pretend, I said. My voice was barely a whisper. I can't pretend to believe something I don't believe. I've tried. For months, I've tried. But I can't do it anymore. Ryan picked up his jacket. Then I don't know what to say, Dad. I don't know who you are anymore. He walked out the door. He did not look back. Linda stood up slowly. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of compassion. They were tears of grief. She was mourning me, mourning the husband she thought she knew. I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days, she said. I need time to think. Linda, please. Don't. She held up her hand. Just don't. She walked upstairs to pack a bag. I sat in the living room alone, listening to her footsteps above me, listening to the sound of drawers opening and closing, listening to my marriage fall apart one folded shirt at a time. I thought about what Ryan had said. He had asked if I had been reading anti-Mormon material. He could not accept that his father's doubts came from official church sources. He needed there to be a villain, an outside force that had corrupted me. Because if there was no villain, then the problem was the church itself, and that was something he could not face. I understood. I had been exactly the same way. For 40 years, I had divided the world into two categories: things that built testimony and things that destroyed it. Truth was whatever confirmed my beliefs. Lies were whatever challenged them. I had never considered that maybe, just maybe, some lies felt true and some truths felt like lies. I sat in that living room until the sun went down. I sat there as the shadows lengthened across the floor. I sat there as the house grew silent and empty, and I realized that every truth I had gained came with an equal loss. The higher I climbed toward understanding, the further I fell from everyone I loved. There was a balance in it, a terrible symmetry. The universe did not give without taking. Every door that opened closed another one behind me. But I could not go back. I could not unsee what I had seen. I could not unknow what I knew. The only path forward was through the darkness, even if I had to walk it alone. The night before my world completely collapsed, Emily called me. What she told me changed everything. Emily's voice on the phone was quiet, almost a whisper, as if she were afraid someone might hear her. It was nearly 11 at night, and I was sitting alone in the dark living room, the same place I had been for hours since Linda left. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be angry with me." "Emily, I could never be angry with you. What is it?" There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could sense her gathering courage. "The folder I left on your desk. The gospel topics essays and the CES letter pages. I didn't leave them by accident." I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I had suspected this. But hearing her say it made it real in a way that hurt more than I expected. "I know, sweetheart. You know? I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to believe it. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. I've been out for almost 2 years. Mentally out, I mean. I stopped believing when I was 20, but I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't tell Mom. I couldn't tell Ryan or the others. And I definitely couldn't tell you. You were the bishop. You were the most faithful person I knew. I thought you would disown me." I felt tears running down my face. "Emily, I would never disown you. You're my daughter. Nothing could change that. I know that now, but I didn't know it then. So I just kept pretending. I went to church, I took the sacrament. I even dated a returned missionary because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And the whole time, I was dying inside. I was living a lie, and I couldn't tell anyone." "Why didn't you come to me?" "Because I watched what you did to others. Not you specifically, but the church. I watched what happened to people who doubted. They were treated like they were sick, like they had a disease that might spread. I saw families torn apart. I saw people lose everything, and I was terrified that would happen to me. I thought about all the interviews I had conducted over the years, all the times I had counseled people to doubt their doubts. All the times I had treated questions as symptoms of spiritual weakness. I had been part of the machine that kept people like Emily silent. I had helped build the walls that trapped her. I'm so sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you couldn't come to me. It's not your fault, Dad. You believed. You really believed. That's what made it so hard. I knew that if I told you the truth, it would break your heart, and I couldn't do that to you. So I thought if I just showed you what I had found, maybe you would figure it out on your own. Maybe you would see what I saw, and then I wouldn't be alone anymore. I sat in the darkness, holding the phone, feeling the weight of everything she had carried by herself for 2 years. My little girl, my youngest child. She had been drowning and I had been too blind to see it, too busy being bishop, too busy being certain. "You're not alone anymore," I said. "I see it now. I see everything." "Dad, there's something else I need to tell you." "What is it?" "I'm not going back to BYU in the fall. I've already transferred to the University of Utah. I'm moving to Salt Lake next month. And I'm not going to keep pretending anymore. I'm going to live my life, my real life. And I wanted you to know before I told everyone else." I thought about what this would mean. Emily openly leaving the church. The shame Linda would feel. The judgment from the ward. The family dinners that would become battlegrounds. "I'm proud of you," I said. "I'm so proud of you for having the courage to be honest." She started crying then. Deep, shaking sobs that broke my heart. "I was so scared you would hate me." "I could never hate you, Emily. You're the bravest person I know." We talked for another hour. She told me about her journey, about the books she had read, the podcasts she had listened to, the online communities that had helped her realize she was not alone. She told me about the guilt she felt for leaving the folder on my desk, for setting in motion the destruction of my testimony. She told me she had almost come forward a dozen times to confess, but she was afraid of what it might do to me. "You didn't destroy anything," I told her. "You set me free." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time. I thought about Emily living her double life for 2 years, smiling at Sunday dinners while screaming inside. I thought about all the others like her, the countless members who sat in pews every Sunday pretending to believe, too afraid to speak their truth. I thought about the interviews I had conducted, the young people who had come to me with doubts, and I wondered how many of them I had pushed deeper into silence. How many Emilys had I failed? The next morning I received a letter. It came in an official church envelope, the kind that always meant something serious. I opened it at the kitchen table, alone, the morning light streaming through the windows. It was a summons to a disciplinary council. The letter was formal, bureaucratic, using language I had used myself dozens of times. I was being charged with apostasy. The council would convene in 2 weeks. I was invited to attend and speak in my own defense. I read the letter 3 times. Each time the words seemed to belong to someone else's life. I had sat on the other side of that table so many times. I had been the one asking questions, weighing evidence, deciding fates. I had excommunicated people for less than what I was now guilty of. And now I was the one being judged. The 2 weeks before the council were a strange kind of limbo. Linda came back from her sister's house, but she was different, distant. She moved through the house like a ghost, speaking to me only when necessary. We slept in separate rooms. We ate meals in silence. The life we had built together had become a museum, full of artifacts from a marriage that no longer existed. Ryan called once, briefly. He told me he had spoken with the stake president. He told me he was praying for me. He told me he hoped I would come to my senses before it was too late. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask what I was feeling. He spoke to me like I was a problem to be solved, not a father to be loved. My other children were similar. My daughter Rachel sent a text message saying she was worried about me and asking if I had considered seeing a therapist. My son David did not contact me at all. I learned later that he had told his wife that I was going through something and that it was best to keep their distance until I figured it out. Only Emily stayed close. She came to visit twice during those 2 weeks, bringing groceries and sitting with me in the kitchen while I stared at the walls. She did not try to fix me. She did not offer advice or reassurance. She just sat with me in the wreckage, keeping me company in the ruins. "What are you going to say at the council?" she asked one afternoon. "I don't know. I've been thinking about it constantly, but I don't know." "You could deny it. Tell them what they want to hear. Keep your membership." I could. But what would be the point? I'd still be living a lie. I'd still be pretending to believe something I don't believe. "Then tell them the truth." "The truth?" I laughed bitterly. "The truth is what got me here in the first place." No, Dad. Hiding the truth is what got you here, what got all of us here. The whole system is built on hiding the truth, on telling people to doubt their doubts, on pretending everything is okay when nothing is okay. Maybe it's time for someone to stop pretending. I looked at my daughter. She was so young, but in that moment she seemed wiser than I had ever been. She had faced her truth years ago, alone, without support. And she had survived. She had found her way to the other side. "You're right," I said. "I'm done pretending." The night before the council, I sat down at my desk and wrote out what I wanted to say. Not a defense. Not an excuse. Just the truth. My truth. The journey I had taken from certainty to doubt to something that felt like clarity. I wrote about the essays I had read, the questions that had haunted me, the loneliness of discovering that everything I believed was built on sand. I wrote about Emily, about the conversation that had shown me I was not alone. I wrote about the price of truth and the cost of silence. When I finished, it was nearly 3 a.m. I read through what I had written, and I felt something I had not felt in months. Not peace, exactly, but acceptance. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it honestly. I would not hide. I would not pretend. I would speak my truth, even if no one wanted to hear it. The council convened on a Tuesday evening in July. The stake center was quiet when I arrived, the parking lot nearly empty. I walked through the doors I had walked through thousands of times, past the familiar hallways, past the paintings of Jesus and Joseph Smith that had watched over me my entire life. The council was held in the high council room. When I entered, I saw 15 men seated in a semicircle, their faces solemn. President Harrison sat at the center. To his right were his counselors. To his left were members of the High Council, men I had worked with for years, men who had sat in my living room and eaten my wife's cooking, and called me brother. They did not look at me like a brother now. They looked at me like a defendant. I was directed to a chair in the center of the room facing the semicircle. It felt like a courtroom. It felt like a trial. Because that's exactly what it was. President Harrison opened with a prayer. He asked Heavenly Father to guide the proceedings, to help them discern the truth, to bring a spirit of love and reconciliation. The words sounded hollow to me. I had said the same words in the same room when I was on the other side of the table. I knew how these councils worked. The decision was usually made before anyone walked through the door. Brother Jensen, President Harrison began, you have been called before this council to address concerns about your testimony and your standing in the church. Specifically, you have been accused of apostasy, which is defined as repeatedly acting in clear and deliberate public opposition to the church, its doctrine, its policies, or its leaders. I nodded. I understand. You have the opportunity to respond to these concerns. Would you like to speak? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the papers I had written the night before. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. President Harrison, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've prepared some thoughts, and I ask that you let me finish before asking questions. He nodded. I took a deep breath and began. I have been a member of this church for 57 years. I was baptized at 8, ordained to the priesthood at 12, served a mission at 19, married in the temple at 23, and served as bishop of my ward for nearly a decade. Every major decision of my life has been guided by my faith in the gospel. I have tried to live worthily, to serve faithfully, to raise my children in the covenant. I believed, with all my heart, that this church was the only true and living church on the face of the earth. I paused, looking at the faces around me. Some were sympathetic, others were hard, closed off. A few months ago, I read the Gospel Topics essays on the church's official website. I read them because my daughter was having questions, and I wanted to help her find answers. What I found instead were questions of my own. Questions about the translation of the Book of Mormon. Questions about the first vision. Questions about Joseph Smith's plural marriages. Questions about the Book of Abraham. I could see President Harrison shifting in his seat. This was not the kind of defense he was expecting. I want to be clear. I did not seek out anti-Mormon material. I did not visit websites run by critics of the church. Everything I read was published by the church itself. Official sources, church-approved materials, and what I found in those materials contradicted nearly everything I had been taught and everything I had taught others. I looked down at my papers, then back up at the council. I learned that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon by placing a seer stone in a hat and burying his face in it. I had never heard this in 40 years of church membership. I learned that there are multiple conflicting accounts of the first vision. I had always been taught there was one consistent account. I learned that Joseph Smith married at least 33 women, including a 14-year-old girl and several women who were already married to other men. I had always been taught that polygamy was a reluctant commandment, practiced only to care for widows. The room was completely silent. I could feel the tension building, the discomfort radiating from the men around me. I am not here to attack the church. I am not here to convince anyone that my conclusions are correct. I am here to explain my journey and to speak honestly about where I now stand. After months of study, prayer, and reflection, I can no longer testify that the church is true. I can no longer say that Joseph Smith was a prophet in the way I once believed. I can no longer affirm that the Book of Mormon is a literal historical record. Brother Jensen, one of the high counselors, interrupted. Are you saying you have lost your testimony? I looked at him. Brother Matthews. I had known him for 20 years. Our children had grown up together. I'm saying my testimony has changed. I still believe in God. I still believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ. But I no longer believe that this church is the exclusive repository of truth. I no longer believe that the prophets are infallible, and I cannot, in good conscience, pretend otherwise. President Harrison leaned forward. Marcus, we've known each other a long time. I've watched you serve this community with dedication and love. What you're describing sounds like a crisis of faith. These are not uncommon. Many faithful members have had seasons of doubt and have come through stronger on the other side. Have you considered that this might be a test? A trial meant to strengthen your testimony? I have considered that, President. I considered it for months. I prayed. I fasted. I begged God to show me that I was wrong. But every time I prayed, the answer was the same. The truth is the truth, even when it's painful. I cannot go back to believing something I know to be incomplete. But your knowledge is incomplete, another counselor said. We don't have all the answers. That's what faith is for. Faith fills in the gaps. I understand that, but faith should not require ignoring evidence. Faith should not require pretending that problems don't exist. I was never given the chance to exercise informed faith. I was given a sanitized version of history and told it was the complete truth. When I discovered the full picture, I felt betrayed. Not by God. By the institution that claimed to speak for him. The room fell silent again. I could see the men exchanging glances, communicating without words. I knew what they were thinking. I had thought the same things about others who sat in this chair. Is there anything else you want to say? President Harrison asked. I looked at my papers. There was more. So much more. But I could see that it would not matter. Their minds were already made up. Just one thing, I said. Whatever you decide tonight, I want you to know that I hold no anger toward any of you. You are doing what you believe is right. You are following the procedures you have been taught. I was once in your position. I once believed that these councils were inspired by God, that the decisions made here were His decisions. I no longer believe that. But I understand why you do, and I hope that someday, if any of you ever face what I have faced, you will find the courage to be honest too. They asked me to wait outside while they deliberated. I sat in the hallway on a metal folding chair, staring at the carpet, listening to the muffled voices behind the closed door. I thought about all the people who had sat in this same hallway, waiting to learn their fate. I thought about the lives that had been changed by decisions made in that room. I thought about the power we give to institutions, the authority we grant them over our souls. After about 45 minutes, the door opened. President Harrison stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "Brother Jensen, please come in." I walked back into the room and took my seat. The atmosphere had changed. The tension had been replaced by something that felt like resignation. President Harrison cleared his throat. "The Council has reached a decision. Based on your statements tonight and your expressed disbelief in the foundational truth claims of the Church, we have determined that you have committed apostasy as defined by Church policy. The decision of this Council is to withdraw your membership in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." I nodded slowly. I had expected this. I had prepared for it. But hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. "Your name will be removed from the records of the Church. Any priesthood ordinations, temple ordinances, or blessings you have received are hereby revoked. Your sealing to your wife and children is no longer recognized by the Church." I thought about Linda, about our wedding day in the Salt Lake Temple, about the promises we made to each other, promises we believed would last for eternity. All of it erased with a few sentences. "Do you have any questions?" I shook my head. What was there to ask? The decision was made. The verdict was final. Then this council is adjourned. I walked out of the stake center into the warm July night. The parking lot was empty except for my car. The stars were bright overhead, brighter than I had noticed in years. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the night air, feeling the weight of 40 years lift from my shoulders. I was no longer a Mormon. I was no longer a bishop. I was no longer sealed to my wife or my children. Everything I had believed, everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed for was gone. But standing there under the stars, I did not feel empty. I felt free. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that this was not the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The weeks after my excommunication were the strangest of my life. I moved through the days like a man walking through fog, unsure of where I was going or what I was supposed to do when I got there. For 57 years, every aspect of my life had been structured around the church. Sunday services, Wednesday activities, temple attendance, home teaching, leadership meetings. Suddenly, all of it was gone. My calendar was empty. My purpose was unclear. I had spent my entire adult life knowing exactly who I was and what I was supposed to be doing. Now I was a stranger to myself. Linda filed for legal separation 3 weeks after the council. She told me she still loved me, but could not be married to an apostate. She said she had spoken with the stake president and with her bishop, and they had counseled her to protect her own spiritual welfare. She said she hoped I would someday find my way back to the truth, but until then, she needed distance. I did not fight her. How could I? She was doing exactly what she believed was right. She was following the same teachings I had followed for 40 years. I could not blame her for being faithful to a system I had helped build. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of Provo, away from the ward boundaries where everyone knew me. I did not want to run into former ward members at the grocery store. I did not want to see the pity in their eyes or hear the whispered conversations that would stop when I walked by. I wanted to disappear. But Emily would not let me disappear. She called every day, sometimes twice. She brought me groceries when I forgot to eat. She sat with me on my small balcony and watched the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. She was my lifeline, my one connection to a world that had not completely abandoned me. "You need to talk to someone," she said one evening. "A therapist, someone who understands faith transitions." "I don't need a therapist. I need time." "Dad, you've been sitting in this apartment for 3 weeks. You barely eat. You don't sleep. You just sit there staring at the walls. That's not processing, that's drowning." I looked at my daughter. She was so young, but she had been through this before me. She had navigated these waters alone, without anyone to guide her. and she had come out the other side. "How did you do it?" I asked. "How did you survive?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I found people who understood. Online at first, ex-Mormon forums and Facebook groups, then in person. There's a whole community out there, Dad. People who have been through exactly what you're going through. You don't have to do this alone." The next week, Emily took me to a support group in Salt Lake City. It met in a community center, about 20 people sitting in folding chairs in a circle. They were all ages, all backgrounds, but they all had one thing in common. They had all left the church. I sat in the corner, not speaking, just listening. One by one, people shared their stories. A woman in her 60s who had discovered the essays after her husband died and had been excommunicated when she refused to stop asking questions. A young man in his 20s who had been kicked out of BYU for expressing doubts on social media. A couple in their 40s who had lost custody of their children because the court decided that leaving the church made them unfit parents. Every story was different, but they all had the same shape: discovery, doubt, isolation, loss. And then, slowly, painfully, rebuilding. When the meeting ended, a man about my age approached me. He had kind eyes and a firm handshake. "First time?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Gerald. I was a bishop too, 15 years ago." "How long did it take? To feel normal again?" He laughed softly. "I'll let you know when it happens." We talked for an hour after everyone else had left. Gerald told me his story, which was remarkably similar to mine. He had discovered the same problems, asked the same questions, received the same non-answers. His wife had left him. 2 of his 3 children still would not speak to him. But his youngest daughter had followed him out of the church, and now they were closer than ever. "The pain doesn't go away," Gerald said, "but it changes. It becomes something you carry, instead of something that carries you. And eventually, you start to see that what you lost was not as valuable as what you gained." What did you gain? Myself. My authenticity. The freedom to think and question and grow without being told that doubt is a sin. I gained the ability to love people for who they are, not for how well they conform to a set of rules. I gained a life that's actually mine. I thought about his words on the drive home. I thought about them as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment. I thought about them as the weeks turned into months and the sharp edge of my grief slowly dulled into something more manageable. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in religious trauma. At first I resisted the term. Trauma seemed too strong. I had not been abused. I had not been physically harmed. But Dr. Chen helped me understand that trauma comes in many forms: the loss of your entire belief system, the rejection by your community, the destruction of your family. These were wounds, even if they did not leave visible scars. We talked about identity, about how I had defined myself entirely through the church and how the loss of that identity felt like death. We talked about grief, about how I was mourning not just the church but the life I thought I would have, the eternal family I had been promised, the certainty that had once made everything make sense. We talked about rebuilding, about how I could create a new identity, a new purpose, a new way of being in the world. It was slow work. There were days when I felt like I was making progress and days when I wanted to crawl back into bed and never get up. There were moments when I missed the church so desperately that I considered going back, pretending to believe just to have the community and structure again. But I knew I could not do that. I had seen the truth. I could not unsee it. I'd love to know, what moment in this story hit you the hardest? Tell me in the comments. 6 months after my excommunication, something unexpected happened. Linda called me. We had not spoken directly since she filed for separation. Our communication had been through lawyers and occasional text messages about practical matters, but this was a phone call. Her voice, live, on the other end of the line. "Marcus," she said, "I need to see you." We met at a coffee shop. Not a Utah coffee shop that secretly served herbal tea. A real coffee shop with espresso machines and baristas and the smell of roasted beans. Linda looked uncomfortable from the moment she walked in, but she sat down across from me and ordered a water. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "Of course." She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her water with a straw even though there was nothing to stir. I waited. "I've been doing some reading," she said finally. I felt my heart stop. "Reading? The essays, the ones you tried to show me." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I had not seen in months. Not anger, not pity, fear. "Marcus, why didn't anyone tell us?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't know. I've been a member my whole life. My parents, my grandparents, 5 generations. And no one ever told us about any of this. The rock in the hat, the other wives, the changes to the temple ceremony. Why? I think because they were afraid. Afraid that if people knew the full truth, they would leave. So they only told us the parts that made the church look good. But that's lying. That's bearing false witness. How can the church teach us to be honest and then hide its own history? I did not have an answer. I had asked myself the same question 1,000 times. We talked for hours. Linda told me about her journey over the past 6 months, how she had tried to put my doubts out of her mind, how she had prayed and fasted and attended the temple, hoping to receive confirmation that I was wrong. But the confirmation never came. Instead, the questions I had planted in her mind began to grow. She started reading. Just the gospel topics essays at first, then the sources cited in those essays, then the CES letter, then books by historians and scholars who had studied the same problems I had discovered. "I'm not where you are," she said. "I still want to believe. I still hope there's an explanation for all of this, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't sit in church and hear people bear testimony of things that I now know are more complicated than they're saying." I felt tears running down my face. "Linda, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this." "You don't need to protect me, I'm not a child." She squeezed my hand. "Marcus, I don't know where this leads. I don't know if I'm going to leave the church or find a way to stay. But I know I can't figure it out without you. I've spent 35 years building a life with you. I don't want to throw that away because of something Joseph Smith did 200 years ago." We started meeting weekly. Coffee shops, restaurants, long walks in the mountains. We talked about everything we had never talked about before, about doubt and faith and fear and hope, about what we believed and what we no longer believed and what we were not sure about who we were outside the boxes the church had put us in. It was not easy. There were arguments. There were tears. There were days when it felt like we were speaking different languages and would never understand each other. But there were also moments of connection deeper than anything we had experienced in our temple marriage. We were finally being honest with each other, completely honest, for the first time in 35 years. Linda never formally left the church. She stopped attending, stopped paying tithing, stopped wearing her garments. But she never requested that her name be removed from the records. She said she was not ready for that step. She said she needed to hold on to something, even if she was not sure what that something was anymore. I understood. Everyone's journey is different. Everyone moves at their own pace. The important thing was that we were moving together. My children's reactions were mixed. Ryan, my oldest, still has not spoken to me. It has been over a year now, and he has made it clear that until I repent and return to the church, he wants nothing to do with me. It breaks my heart. I think about him every day. I pray for him, though I no longer know who I am praying to. I hope that someday he will find the courage to ask his own questions, and that when he does, he will remember that his father walked this path before him. Rachel and David eventually came around. Not to leaving the church themselves, but to accepting that I had made my choice, and that it did not change my love for them. We have dinner together once a month. We do not talk about religion. We talk about their jobs, their children, their lives. It is not the close relationship I once dreamed of having with them, but it is something. It is a start. And Emily, my Emily. She graduated from the University of Utah last spring with a degree in history. She is applying to graduate programs now, studying religious movements and faith transitions. She wants to help others who are going through what we went through. She wants to be a guide for people lost in the wilderness. I have never been more proud of her. There is a moment I keep coming back to. It was about 8 months after my excommunication. I was sitting on my balcony at sunset watching the light change over the mountains when my phone buzzed. A text message from a number I did not recognize. "Grandpa, can we talk?" It was Tyler, Ryan's oldest son, 16 years old. I had not seen him since before the disciplinary council. Ryan had forbidden his children from having contact with me. I called him back immediately. He answered on the first ring. "Grandpa, I've been reading some stuff online, about the church, about Joseph Smith. And I don't know who else to talk to." I felt my heart crack open. Here it was again. The cycle repeating. Another generation confronting the same questions, the same doubts, the same terrifying realization that everything they had been taught might not be true. "I'm here," I said. "Whatever you need. I'm here." We talked for 2 hours. He told me about the YouTube videos he had found, the Reddit posts, the podcasts. He told me about the fear he felt, the guilt, the loneliness. He told me he was terrified of what his father would do if he found out. "Tyler," I said, "I can't tell you what to believe. That's something you have to figure out for yourself. But I can tell you that you're not alone. There are millions of people who have asked the same questions you're asking. And whatever you decide, whether you stay in the church or leave it, you will always have a grandfather who loves you exactly as you are." He was crying by the end of the call. So was I. That conversation reminded me why I could not regret my journey, despite all the pain it had caused. Because if I had stayed silent, if I had kept pretending, Tyler would have had no one to call. He would have been alone in his doubt, just like Emily had been, just like I had been. The silence ends when someone has the courage to speak. And once you speak, you become a lighthouse for others, lost in the same storm. I am 59 years old now. I live in a small house in Salt Lake City, not far from Emily's apartment. Linda visits most weekends. We are not back together, not officially, but we are closer than we have been in years. We are learning how to love each other without the structure of the church defining what that love is supposed to look like. I no longer believe in the God I was taught to believe in, the old man in heaven who counts your prayers and measures your worthiness. But I believe in something. I believe in the power of truth even when it hurts. I believe in the human capacity for growth and change. I believe that every ending is also a beginning, and that the death of one version of yourself makes space for something new to be born. I used to think that faith meant certainty, that a strong testimony was one that never wavered. But I have learned that real faith is something different. Real faith is the willingness to keep searching even when you do not have answers. Real faith is the courage to let go of what no longer serves you, even when letting go feels like dying. Real faith is trusting that the truth will set you free, even when freedom cost you everything you thought you knew. The mind that questions is not the enemy of truth. It is the only path toward it. Every thought we hold creates ripples in our lives and in the lives of others. When we think with courage, when we pursue truth regardless of the cost, we set in motion forces that transform not just ourselves, but everyone around us. I thought I was destroying my family when I started asking questions. But I was planting seeds. Seeds of honesty, seeds of authenticity, seeds that are now sprouting in my children and grandchildren, giving them permission to be who they really are. I do not know what comes next. I do not know if there is a heaven or a hell or anything at all beyond this life. I no longer claim to have the answers I once thought I possessed. But I know that right now, in this moment, I am living a life that is truly mine. I am thinking thoughts that I have chosen to think. I am loving people for who they are, not for who I want them to be. And that is enough. That is more than enough. My name is Marcus Jensen. I was a Mormon bishop for 40 years. I believed with all my heart that I had found the truth. And then I discovered that truth was bigger, stranger, and more beautiful than anything I had been taught. My life did not end when I lost my testimony. It finally began